Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe, and tap the bell icon. The intergalactic war between the Zilith Dominion and the coalition of free planets had dragged on for centuries. The Zilith Dominion, an empire of advanced aliens, had conquered countless worlds. Their legions were made up of genetically enhanced warriors, towering behemoths of muscle and cunning. Every soldier was bred for battle, honed through years of training and science, a race of near-invincible soldiers designed to ensure domination over the universe. General Zorak, one of the Dominion's most respected and feared leaders, stood at the head of the Council of Generals, observing the holographic maps of the warfront. His cold, green eyes narrowed as the images flickered. The coalition was proving resilient, but he knew that with one final strike, the Zilith would crush them, claiming the human-dominated planet Earth as their new prize. His plans were perfect, his army unbeatable. Then came the reports. It began with a series of intercepts from the human world, rushed, scattered transmissions from scattered ships reporting back to their command centers. At first, General Zorak dismissed it as a minor glitch. He had faced the human forces before, and while they were certainly unpredictable, they were no match for his advanced soldiers. But the further he dug into these transmissions, the more alarming the stories became. Human soldiers, mere humans, were turning the tide. They were taking down Zilith battalions with nothing more than sheer determination, the most primitive of weapons, and unimaginable courage. Entire squads of Zilith warriors had been wiped out by a few dozen human combatants. Curious, Zorak ordered the creation of a special task force. A team of Zilith spies, embedded deep within the coalition's military intelligence, to gather information about these humans. What could possibly be happening? It didn't take long for the answers to arrive. The first transmission was from one of his spies, a highly trained infiltrator who had embedded himself within the human military on Earth. He reported back with one word: impossible. Zorak wasn't familiar with human customs, but the tone in the transmission was clear. Zilith technology had never been fooled by primitive forces. But something was different about these humans. His spy described them as fierce, and unlike anything he had ever encountered before. Their soldiers didn't just fight. They survived, and they did so with a relentless passion that Zorak had never seen. The spy also sent back visual feeds. Soldiers, seemingly normal humans, fighting with the strength of an entire army, pushing forward against insurmountable odds. For the first time in his long, victorious career, Zorak felt doubt gnawing at his insides. At the next Council of Generals meeting, Zorak made his report. The alien generals were confused and intrigued. They weren't accustomed to hearing about any race that could pose a challenge to the Zilith Dominion. They had faced the Urkans, the Draken, and other galactic empires, but none had ever shown such spirit. But General Zorak had seen enough to understand that Earth's human soldiers were not like anything the Zilith had encountered. They could think on their feet, adapt faster than any alien species, and most disturbingly, survive. I believe we have underestimated the humans, Zorak began. His voice steady but filled with an edge of concern. They are not merely soldiers. They are warriors, driven by a force we do not comprehend. The other generals laughed, dismissing his concerns. But Zorak was not one to be easily swayed. Over the next few weeks, he devoted all his resources to studying the human soldier, uncovering the hidden layers of their capabilities. What he found was staggering. Humans, despite their relatively short lifespan compared to other species, possessed an intrinsic will to survive, something the Zilith lacked. It wasn't just physical resilience. It was something far more profound. The humans' capacity for unity, their relentless pursuit of victory in the face of certain death, was beyond what any alien species had ever imagined. Zorak felt a deep, inexplicable urge to see these human soldiers firsthand. The more he studied them, the more fascinated he became. There was something almost sacred about their fight, as though they were defending not just their planet, but their very existence. But his obsession had unintended consequences. Zorak found himself unable to think of anything else but the humans. He saw them as more than enemies now. They were a challenge, something he could no longer ignore. His thoughts began to spiral. Was it possible that the Zilith Dominion could be defeated by such primitive beings? He made a decision. Within hours, Zorak called for a personal meeting with the Emperor of the Zilith Dominion. The meeting was held in the Grand Chamber of the Zilith Fortress, an imposing citadel on the war planet of Caravan. Zorak stood before the Emperor, a massive creature with scales as black as the void. "I request permission to withdraw from the front lines," Zorak said bluntly, his voice steady but filled with a hint of something new. Regret, maybe even fear. "I am done with the war." The Emperor's eyes, glowing with an eerie light, narrowed in disbelief. "What? You, Zorak, the most decorated general in the Dominion's history, wish to abandon the war? For what reason?" "I need to see Earth. I need to understand these humans," Zorak said, his voice uncharacteristically fervent. I believe they are the future of this galaxy." The Emperor's voice boomed through the chamber. "Are you abandoning the Dominion for humans? Do you realize what you are suggesting?" Zorak nodded, his mind already made up. "I am done with this war. I am going to Earth." With that, General Zorak made the most extraordinary decision of his life. He resigned from the Zilith Dominion and set course for Earth. He was no longer a general of an empire. He was a man in search of the unknown, a soldier who had come to understand that perhaps the greatest strength was not in power, but in the sheer will to fight. General Zorak's departure from the Zilith Dominion was nothing short of a scandal. His sudden resignation left the council in shock, his reputation tarnished in the eyes of his peers. But Zorak was undeterred. As he departed the war-torn world of Caravan, he knew that he was leaving behind more than just a job. He was abandoning an entire way of life. In that moment, the weight of his decision felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The journey to Earth was long and arduous, spanning light years through the uncharted reaches of space. Zorak piloted his personal vessel, a sleek craft capable of traversing vast distances, equipped with state-of-the-art Zilith technology. As the stars streaked by in the void of space, Zorak's thoughts wandered back to the human soldiers he had seen in the intercepted transmissions. The images were seared into his memory. Humans, small and fragile by his standards, standing their ground against his own forces, surviving, thriving, even in the face of impossible odds. What was it about them? How had they become such formidable warriors? The more Zorak pondered, the more his fascination grew. The Zilith, in all their superiority, had never faced a race like the humans. While the Zilith were bred for strength and combat, they lacked the raw, unpredictable drive that humans exhibited. Humans fought not because they were born to, but because they chose to. They were warriors not by design, but by sheer force of will. Zorak couldn't stop himself from studying human history. He tapped into the vast archives of the Coalition's intelligence network, sifting through human records and data. What he found was astonishing. Humanity had evolved in the crucible of conflict. Wars, strife, and devastation had shaped their society. But so had resilience, unity, and hope. Every war, every hardship had only made them stronger. Their ability to adapt, to grow in the face of adversity, was unparalleled. He read about the great wars of Earth, the rise of technology, and the immense sacrifices that had been made in the name of survival. He read about individual humans who had overcome impossible challenges, figures who had led armies, stood against invaders, and fought for a better future. And yet, there was no indication of the kind of technology or advanced weaponry that the Zilith possessed. No, it wasn't technology that made humans dangerous. It was their spirit. Zorak didn't understand it. He couldn't. He was a creature of logic, of cold calculation, of power. The human spirit, this intangible force that seemed to drive them to achieve the impossible, was something that couldn't be quantified. But there was no denying that it was there, a power stronger than any weapon, stronger than any army. As his ship approached Earth's orbit, Zorak's anticipation reached a fever pitch. The planet loomed large in his view screen, a swirling blue and green orb surrounded by the vastness of space. He had never seen anything quite like it. Unlike the barren, war-torn worlds of the Zilith, Earth was teeming with life. There was something alive about it, something vibrant and unyielding. It was a planet full of hope. Zorak's ship entered the atmosphere, and he descended toward the surface. He had no idea what he would find once he landed. Would he be welcomed as a curious traveler, or would the humans see him as an enemy, as the Zilith had seen them for so long? Would they understand the depth of his fascination with their species? Would they recognize his desire to learn, to understand, to be a part of their world? His ship touched down in a remote region of Earth, far from the conflict zones where human soldiers were engaged in battle, but close enough to observe them. Zorak carefully emerged from his vessel, stepping into the lush greenery of the Earth's wilderness. The air was thick with the scent of plant life, the sky clear and wide. It was beautiful, and for a moment Zorak simply stood there, taking it all in. For the first time in his life he felt small. Despite all his years of military conquest, Zorak had never experienced anything like this moment of solitude and awe. His advanced armor hummed softly as it adjusted to the Earth's atmosphere, but the quiet of the land seemed to push against it. The sounds of Earth, birds calling, leaves rustling in the wind, were peaceful, almost peaceful to the point of discomfort. Zorak shook off the feeling. He had a mission. He activated his cloaking device, rendering himself invisible to human eyes. He needed to observe them, learn from them. This wasn't just a simple visit. It was an immersion. He would live among them, witness their battles, their struggles, their victories. Only then could he truly understand what made them so extraordinary. For days, Zorak stayed in the wilderness, observing human settlements from afar. He saw humans working in harmony with nature, building cities, forging communities. But it wasn't until he witnessed the first skirmish that he truly understood the nature of their strength. A small group of humans, soldiers, were ambushed by a band of invaders, a rogue faction of alien mercenaries who had been terrorizing the outskirts of Earth's territories. The humans, outnumbered and outgunned, fought back with relentless tenacity. Zorak watched from the shadows as the humans fought not for glory, not for conquest, but for survival. Each soldier fought as if their life depended on it, because, for them, it did. What stunned Zorak the most was how these soldiers, ordinary men and women, no different from the rest of the planet's population, were able to hold their ground against the invaders. They used their environment, their surroundings, to their advantage, fighting in ways Zorak had never seen before. It wasn't about advanced technology or superior weapons. It was about something deeper, something that made them resilient in a way that Zilith soldiers couldn't even begin to comprehend. As the battle raged on, Zorak found himself feeling something. It wasn't just admiration. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a deep, almost overwhelming feeling that he had been missing all along. The humans, in all their imperfections, had something that the Zilith never could, something that even he, with all his experience and knowledge, could never replicate. They had heart. In the end, the humans were victorious. They drove the invaders off their land, saving their fellow citizens. As the soldiers regrouped and tended to the wounded, Zorak finally allowed himself to be seen. He stepped out from the shadows, no longer cloaked, no longer hidden. The humans, startled at first, quickly recognized him as something different, something not entirely of their world. But Zorak wasn't afraid. He had come to understand that this was his destiny, to meet these warriors, to witness their greatness up close, and to find a way to become part of their world. There was no going back now. He had seen the strength of humanity, and it was unlike anything he had ever known. Zorak had never felt this way before. Caught between two worlds, uncertain of where his allegiance now lay. The humans had no idea who he truly was or where he came from. But as he stood before them, watching them tend to their wounded comrades, a new resolve began to form within him. These people, these soldiers, were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting for each other. There was an unmistakable unity in their struggle, a bond that surpassed mere duty. It was something Zorak had never experienced in his own life. He had been a soldier for as long as he could remember, bred for war and victory. The Zilith Dominion had prided itself on its strength and superiority, yet all their power, all their advanced technology, had not prepared them for the human will to survive. Zorak's first step was to approach the soldiers cautiously. He didn't want to appear as a threat, though he knew his imposing form might make them uneasy. He stood tall, even in the presence of the humans, his green-scaled skin gleaming beneath his armor. His alien features were unmistakable. No human could confuse him for one of their own, but he hoped that his quiet, measured approach would prevent panic. One of the soldiers, a tall man with short-cropped hair and a battle-worn uniform, noticed him first. He pointed his weapon at Zorak, but there was no immediate hostility in his eyes, just curiosity mixed with caution. "Who are you?" the soldier asked, his voice steady, though there was a slight tremor of uncertainty. Zorak lowered his head in a gesture of peace, his hands raised slightly to show that he meant no harm. "I am Zorak," he said, his voice calm and deliberate. "I come from beyond your world." The soldier didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he signaled for the others to stand down. Zorak noticed that the soldiers, though alert, did not panic. They were used to facing the unknown. Perhaps Zorak thought this was why they were so formidable. "What do you want?" the soldier asked, still skeptical, but not immediately aggressive. Zorak's mind raced. He knew that if he wanted to be accepted, he would need to explain himself, though how could he? The truth was too complex, too unimaginable. The idea that he had once been one of the Zilith generals, a leader of an empire that sought to conquer their world, seemed impossible. But perhaps he didn't need to tell them everything. "I am not here to conquer," Zorak said finally, his voice firm. "I am here to understand. I have watched your kind fight. I have seen the strength you possess, the courage that drives you. I want to learn." The soldier studied him for a long moment, as though weighing his words. Then, without lowering his weapon, he called over to his commanding officer. "Sergeant, you need to see this." The sergeant, a middle-aged woman with short black hair and a stern expression, approached. Her eyes widened when she saw Zorak standing in front of her, but there was no sign of fear in her posture. Instead, she sized him up, her eyes narrowing in assessment. "You're not human," she stated matter-of-factly, her voice calm yet wary. Zorak nodded. "No, I am not." The sergeant glanced back at her squad, then turned to Zorak. "Then why are you here? You don't look like the kind of enemy we're used to." Zorak took a deep breath, the weight of his choice pressing down on him. "I have left my people, my war, because I cannot continue. I have seen too much. Your soldiers. Your spirit. It is unlike anything I have ever encountered." The sergeant's expression softened slightly, though she was still cautious. "So, you want to join us?" she asked, her tone skeptical but open. Zorak hesitated for a moment. The idea of aligning himself with humans, of fighting alongside them, felt strange, but it also felt like the right thing to do. Perhaps this was the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to shed his past and forge a new path forward, a path of purpose, of unity. "Yes," Zorak answered quietly. "I want to learn to fight like you. I want to fight for what you fight for." The sergeant studied him for another long moment. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll let you stay, but don't expect any special treatment. You'll earn your place, just like the rest of us." Zorak's chest swelled with a mixture of pride and relief. For the first time in a long while, he felt as though he had found a place where he belonged. Over the next several weeks, Zorak immersed himself in human life. The soldiers took him in, teaching him their ways of combat. They didn't hold back. They made him endure the same grueling training exercises, the same drills, the same sleepless nights. They showed him the value of teamwork, of trust, of sacrifice. And Zorak, for the first time in his life, understood the true meaning of unity. At first, Zorak's alien physiology made it difficult for him to keep up. His Zilith strength and endurance were impressive, but human tactics were far more varied and unpredictable than anything he had encountered. The humans were resourceful, using the environment around them in ways that the Zilith would have never considered. Zorak struggled to adapt at first, but he was determined. It was during one particularly grueling exercise, where Zorak was tasked with infiltrating an enemy stronghold, that he truly began to feel the human spirit within him. He and his squad had been tasked with a mock mission, simulating an assault on a fortified position. Zorak had been given the role of a scout, a position that required not just strength, but subtlety and cunning. As the mission progressed, Zorak's squad was pinned down by an opposing force. The humans, who had once seemed so fragile to him, now displayed the kind of endurance and ingenuity he had only read about in ancient texts. They fought with everything they had, using every weapon at their disposal and adapting to the chaos of the situation. It was in that moment, as Zorak ducked behind cover with his squad, that he realized something profound. He had never fought for anyone else before, only for himself, for glory, for conquest. But now, as he looked at these humans, he understood what made them powerful. They weren't just fighting for victory. They were fighting for each other, for their shared survival. And for the first time in his life, Zorak truly wanted to fight for them. When the exercise was over, Zorak stood with his squad, panting and covered in dirt, but filled with a sense of accomplishment he had never known. The sergeant clapped him on the back, a rare smile crossing her face. "You're getting the hang of it," she said. "Welcome to the team, Zorak." In that moment, Zorak realized that he had made the right choice. He had found something greater than victory. He had found purpose. And this time, it wasn't about conquering worlds or defeating enemies. It was about fighting for something worth protecting. Zorak had become part of the team in ways he hadn't imagined possible. Every day, his connection to the human soldiers grew stronger. No longer a solitary being, a general of a ruthless empire, he now felt like a member of something bigger, something worth fighting for. The camaraderie, the shared sense of purpose, was intoxicating, and every day, he learned something new about these remarkable creatures. But as the days turned into weeks, the war raged on in the distance. The coalition had grown accustomed to Zorak's presence. Initially, there had been skepticism, fear even about his true motives. But over time, his actions spoke louder than any words. He proved his loyalty through his efforts, through his unwavering resolve to fight for the same cause as the humans he now called comrades. He had earned their respect. Still, the realities of war were inescapable. There were times when the calls of battle came, times when Zorak had to face the very empire he had once served. As the coalition soldiers prepared for the next assault on Zilith forces, Zorak found himself in a battle unlike any he had experienced before. The mission was simple in theory: disrupt a Zilith supply line on the outskirts of a heavily fortified Zilith outpost. But in reality, the operation was a high-risk endeavor. The Zilith forces were among the best-equipped soldiers in the galaxy, their advanced technology and sheer numbers making them nearly unbeatable. But this time, the humans had a secret weapon: Zorak. "I know their tactics," Zorak had said during the briefing. "I know how they think. Let me help you." The humans didn't need to ask why Zorak was so eager to help. The answer was clear. He was no longer one of them. He wasn't fighting for an empire's glory. He was fighting to protect the people he now considered his family. The plan was set. Zorak, alongside a squad of human soldiers, would infiltrate the Zilith-controlled zone and sabotage their supply lines. It was a dangerous mission, and there would be no room for error. But the stakes were high. If they succeeded, they could disrupt the entire Zilith war effort on Earth, buying the coalition invaluable time to regroup and strategize. Before setting out, Zorak felt the familiar rush of anticipation that came before a battle. His Zilith blood burned with the instinct to fight, but this time he was not an enemy. This time he fought for the very people he had once sought to conquer. The squad made their way through dense forests, using the natural cover to avoid detection. Zorak led them, his sharp senses, picking up on every rustle of movement in the trees, every sound of the wind. His advanced Zilith eyes allowed him to see far beyond what human soldiers could, detecting even the slightest shifts in the environment. But it was his training alongside these soldiers that had honed his instincts, teaching him how to operate in the world of humans, where unpredictability reigned. The team moved quickly, silently toward their target. As they neared the Zilith encampment, Zorak's mind raced. This would be the first time he faced his old comrades since leaving the Dominion. Would they recognize him? Would they attempt to stop him? The thought of once again facing the Zilith soldiers, now on the opposite side, filled him with a sense of finality. He had chosen his path. There would be no turning back. The Zilith camp loomed ahead, a sprawling fortress of metal and technology. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their imposing figures a stark contrast to the human soldiers' agility and stealth. Zorak signaled for the squad to halt. He scanned the area with precision, his mind calculating the best course of action. "We'll split into 2 teams, Zorak instructed, his voice low and steady. Team 1 will take the east side. Team 2, with me, will move to the west and plant explosives. We'll meet at the rendezvous point once the charges are set." The soldiers nodded in agreement, their eyes sharp with focus. Zorak had led them into the heart of enemy territory before, but this time, there was more at stake. The fate of Earth hung in the balance. As they infiltrated the camp, Zorak's heart raced. The Zilith soldiers moved in synchronized patterns, their advanced tech allowing them to detect even the slightest change in their surroundings. But Zorak knew the way they thought. He anticipated their movements, staying 1 step ahead. He had fought alongside them for years, and that experience gave him an edge. It wasn't long before the first sign of trouble emerged. A Zilith patrol rounded the corner, spotting the human squad. Instantly, blaster fire erupted in the air, and Zorak's heart pounded with the familiar adrenaline of combat. "Take cover!" Zorak shouted, his voice commanding but calm. He immediately sprang into action, charging toward the nearest patrol with the intensity of a predator. His Zilith-enhanced strength gave him an advantage, allowing him to take down 2 of the Zilith soldiers with ease. But it was the humans' resilience that impressed him. They moved with precision, reacting swiftly, using their environment to their advantage. As the firefight raged on, Zorak found himself fighting not just for survival, but for a cause he now deeply believed in. He had once commanded armies that destroyed worlds. Now, he was fighting to protect those who refused to be conquered. The humans weren't just surviving, they were thriving, adapting, and fighting with everything they had. And that was what made them formidable. The battle was fierce. Zorak's squad moved swiftly, planting explosives along the Zilith supply lines while fending off waves of enemy soldiers. The sound of gunfire filled the air, a constant reminder of the high stakes. But Zorak felt a strange peace within himself, knowing that each strike, each blow, was for something far greater than personal glory. After what felt like an eternity, the squad completed their mission. The charges were set. The Zilith supply line had been destroyed, and the Zilith soldiers, though fierce, were retreating. Zorak stood with his squad, breathing heavily, his body sore from the fight. "We did it," one of the soldiers said, a grin spreading across his face. "We took them down." Zorak looked around at his comrades. They were bloodied, bruised, but they stood tall. They had won this battle not because they had superior technology, but because they had something the Zilith lacked: heart. The explosion in the distance signaled the success of their mission. The Zilith would be delayed, but this victory was more than just a tactical win. It was a symbolic one. Zorak had shown them that no empire, no matter how powerful, could defeat the indomitable spirit of humanity. As they made their way back to the rendezvous point, Zorak felt a sense of pride he had never known. The humans had accepted him as one of their own, and together, they had proven that no force in the galaxy could stand against them. And for the first time in his life, Zorak understood what it meant to fight not for conquest, but for the survival of those you held dear. The war was far from over, but Zorak knew one thing for certain. He was no longer fighting for an empire. He was fighting for Earth, and for the people who had shown him that true strength lay in unity, in resilience, and in the will to survive. Zorak stood atop a cliff, overlooking the charred remains of the Zilith supply base. The explosion had been powerful, sending a shockwave that could be felt for miles. Yet, as the dust settled and the smoke billowed into the sky, Zorak felt no satisfaction. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. There would be repercussions, and the Zilith would not take their defeat lightly. The humans were celebrating their victory, but Zorak couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. His former people were not ones to back down after suffering a loss, especially not when it came to Earth. He had seen them crush entire civilizations before. The Zilith did not know how to accept defeat, they only knew how to escalate. "Zorak, you alright?" The voice of Sergeant Reyes broke through his thoughts. Zorak turned to find her standing behind him, her face smeared with dirt but her eyes sharp with concern. She had become something of a mentor to him, guiding him through the intricacies of human tactics and camaraderie. She had shown him what it meant to be part of a team, to fight not just for survival, but for each other. "I'm fine," Zorak replied, though his voice was distant. "But the Zilith will retaliate. This victory has made us a target." Reyes nodded solemnly. "Yeah, we're not out of the woods yet. But today we sent a message. We're not going to back down." Zorak's gaze lingered on the horizon. He had once been part of the Zilith war machine, the very force that sought to crush the coalition. He had known their strategy, their methods, their relentless drive to win at any cost. And yet, there was something different about the humans. Their spirit, their refusal to accept defeat, was a weapon in itself. But would it be enough when the full might of the Zilith army came crashing down on them? "We need to prepare," Zorak said, his tone resolute. "The Zilith will not forgive us for this." Sergeant Reyes frowned, her gaze shifting toward the rest of the squad, who were now packing up and preparing to move out. "You're right, they won't. But we'll be ready. We'll fight back with everything we've got." As Zorak turned to rejoin the others, his mind continued to churn with the knowledge of what was coming. He knew the Zilith too well. They would likely launch a counteroffensive, and they would use every advantage they had. Their numbers were vast, their technology unparalleled. But they lacked something the humans had in spades: unity. And that, Zorak realized, was their greatest strength. Days passed, and the atmosphere grew heavier with each passing hour. The coalition forces were working tirelessly to fortify their positions, preparing for the inevitable Zilith response. Zorak trained with the humans, pushing himself to his limits, but it wasn't enough. He could sense the growing tension in the air. The Zilith were coming. He could feel it in his bones. Then the first wave arrived. Came without warning, like a storm. The Zilith had deployed a fleet of heavily armored ships that entered the atmosphere without any prior detection. Their weapons were unlike anything the coalition had ever encountered. A devastating combination of energy shields and high-powered plasma cannons. Within moments, the skies were filled with explosions, and the ground shook as the Zilith unleashed their fury. The coalition had no time to prepare. They scrambled to defend their position, sending out every available fighter and ground troop to repel the attack. Zorak was at the front lines with Sergeant Reyes and the rest of his squad, their weapons raised, their faces set in determination. "This is it," Reyes said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "We fight like we've never fought before." Zorak didn't need any more encouragement. He had already made his choice, and he would stand with the humans no matter the cost. The first Zilith ship fell from the sky in a fireball, its explosion lighting up the night like a star being born. But there were more, countless ships, each one descending upon the coalition forces with lethal precision. Zorak's enhanced senses detected them before they were even visible to the human soldiers. He could feel the vibrations of their engines, hear the hum of their plasma cannons as they charged up. "Get to cover!" Zorak shouted, his voice cutting through the din of battle. He and the squad darted behind the remnants of a destroyed building, narrowly avoiding a plasma bolt that seared through the air, vaporizing the ground where they had stood only moments before. The fight was brutal. Zorak's Zilith-enhanced strength gave him an advantage in close combat, but the humans were no less skilled. Their weapons were not as powerful as the Zilith's, but they were fast and efficient, and they knew how to use their surroundings to gain the upper hand. The battle was a chaotic, bloody dance, each move calculated but filled with the unpredictability that made human soldiers so dangerous. Zorak fought with a fury he had never known. His mind was sharp, his movements precise as he took down Zilith soldiers one by one, his massive fists crushing armor and bone alike. But with each fallen enemy, the Zilith seemed to send two more in its place. They were relentless, their tactics merciless. Zorak could hear the unmistakable sound of their war cry echoing across the battlefield, a chilling reminder of the power that still remained on the other side. "Zorak, we need to fall back," Sergeant Reyes yelled, her voice urgent. Zorak hesitated. The humans had already taken heavy losses, and their lines were beginning to break. The Zilith were pressing forward, and it was clear that the coalition forces would not be able to hold out much longer without reinforcements. "We can't hold them off for much longer," Reyes said, her eyes filled with the weight of the decision. "We need to fall back to the secondary perimeter." Zorak knew what that meant. It meant retreat. It meant giving ground to the enemy, something he had never done before. The thought of retreating, of running from the Zilith, was anathema to everything he had ever believed in. But this time he understood. This time retreat wasn't cowardice. It was strategy. The humans had always known how to fight, not just for victory, but for survival. And they were not done yet. "Understood," Zorak said, his voice steady. He helped cover the retreat, taking down Zilith soldiers as the squad made its way to the secondary perimeter. The Zilith were relentless, but they were not invincible. Zorak knew that the humans would find a way to fight back. They always did. As they reached the secondary position, Zorak turned back to face the battlefield, his heart heavy with the knowledge of what lay ahead. The battle was far from over. The Zilith were here to conquer, to annihilate. But the humans would not yield. Zorak had once fought for an empire that sought to control everything. Now, he fought for a people who sought nothing more than to preserve their freedom. And he would stand with them no matter what it took. The secondary perimeter was hastily constructed, a thin line of defensive positions and barricades meant to slow the inevitable Zilith onslaught. It wasn't ideal, but it was all the coalition had left. Zorak stood with the soldiers, his pulse hammering in his ears as he surveyed the battlefield. The Zilith were advancing, their armored forces inexorably pushing forward, overwhelming the coalition's defenses with brutal efficiency. Sergeant Reyes had ordered the retreat as soon as the primary perimeter was breached, and they had fallen back to this secondary line. It was a temporary measure at best, but it would buy them time to regroup, time to come up with a plan. Zorak knew that their chances of surviving this were slim, but as he looked at the faces of the soldiers around him, there was no fear, only determination. The humans didn't run. They fought. "We're not giving up," Reyes said, her voice unwavering despite the looming threat. She turned to Zorak. "Any ideas?" Zorak scanned the battlefield, his mind working with the precision of a seasoned strategist. The Zilith had the superior firepower, but they weren't invincible. Their strategy was straightforward: crush everything in their path with overwhelming force. But humans had something the Zilith could never replicate: resilience, adaptability, and a willingness to fight for something greater than themselves. "We need to draw them into a choke point," Zorak said, his voice steady as he pointed to a narrow ravine that cut through the landscape. "If we can funnel their forces through there, we'll have the advantage." Reyes looked to the ravine, then back at Zorak. "You think we can hold them there?" Zorak nodded. "If we reinforce the choke point with traps and explosives, we can slow them down long enough to strike a decisive blow." Reyes didn't hesitate. "All right, let's do it." The soldiers quickly set to work, using every scrap of material they had to create obstacles and makeshift barricades along the ravine. Zorak moved among them, coordinating the placement of explosives and traps. His knowledge of the Zilith's tactics was invaluable in this moment. He knew their mindset, their strategy, and he knew that if they could bait the Zilith into the ravine, they might just have a chance. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky was lit by the flickering glow of distant explosions. The Zilith were closing in. Their war machines loomed on the horizon, massive and imposing, each one a testament to their technological superiority. Zorak could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. There was no turning back now. "We're ready," Reyes said, her voice grim. She turned to the soldiers. "This is it. Hold the line. We fight for Earth." The sound of Zilith warships filled the air, their engines humming like an ominous prelude to the storm. Zorak's pulse quickened as the first wave of enemy soldiers emerged from the treeline. The Zilith were charging, confident in their victory. They had no idea what awaited them. Now, Zorak muttered to himself. The coalition forces opened fire. The first wave of Zilith soldiers was met with a barrage of plasma and kinetic energy. Their shields flaring to life as they attempted to block the incoming fire. But Zorak had anticipated their move. The choke point was working. The Zilith were funneled into the narrow ravine, where their numbers became a liability rather than an advantage. Zorak's team had set traps, mines, explosives, and hidden weapons, all waiting for the perfect moment. The Zilith, confident that their overwhelming numbers would carry them through, didn't realize they had walked into a deadly snare. Now! Zorak yelled. Explosions erupted in rapid succession, sending the ravine into chaos. The Zilith forces, caught in the deadly crossfire, were torn apart by the blasts. The narrow passage made it impossible for them to maneuver, and their shields were ineffective against the barrage of explosives. The humans had turned the tables, using their environment, their creativity, to defeat a seemingly unstoppable force. But even as the Zilith forces were shredded, Zorak knew this wasn't the end. The Zilith had more firepower, more soldiers, and more ships. This was only a temporary victory, one that would buy them precious minutes at best. "We've got to push them back," Reyes ordered, rallying the soldiers. "Keep the pressure on." The humans surged forward, their weapons blazing as they moved to finish the job. Zorak, once a general of the Zilith, now stood with his new comrades, fighting side by side, not as enemies, but as allies. It was a strange feeling, one he couldn't quite put into words, but it was a feeling that drove him forward, propelled him to fight with a ferocity he had never known. The Zilith, shaken by the unexpected resistance, began to regroup. Their war machines advanced, and the air was filled with the deafening roar of their plasma cannons. The Zilith forces were trying to break through the choke point, but the humans had anticipated their move. Every time the Zilith tried to advance, they were met with overwhelming firepower from the coalition forces. Zorak was in the thick of it, his combat instincts honed to perfection. He fought with the grace and precision of a Zilith warrior, but it was the humans' will to survive that made them unstoppable. Zorak had learned that firsthand. He fought alongside Sergeant Reyes, taking down Zilith soldiers with brutal efficiency. Each blow he landed felt like a reminder of who he had been, and who he had become. He had once fought for an empire that sought to dominate and destroy. Now he fought for a cause that was greater than any empire, the survival of a people who refused to bow down, who refused to give up. The Zilith were relentless, but so were the humans. Every time the Zilith pushed forward, the coalition forces countered, driving them back with everything they had. The battle raged on, a brutal dance of destruction, but Zorak knew that the Zilith couldn't sustain this pace. Their forces were thinning, their supply lines stretched to their breaking point. And then, just as it seemed like the humans might be overwhelmed, a new sound filled the air, an unmistakable roar of engines. Reinforcements. Human reinforcements. The coalition had called in everything they had left. Zorak's heart lifted as he saw the incoming ships, familiar human-made vessels, rushing to the front lines. They were not just here to defend Earth. They were here to win. "We've got this," Reyes said, her voice steady as she saw the reinforcements arriving. "We're not done yet." Zorak looked at her, the fire in his eyes matching hers. The Zilith had underestimated humanity, but that would be their mistake. The humans would not stop fighting. And now neither would Zorak. The war had only just begun, and the Zilith would soon learn that Earth was not a world they could conquer. It was a world that would fight back, and it would win. The roar of human reinforcements filled the sky like a wave crashing against a cliff. It was an unmistakable sound, the hum of coalition ships racing toward the battlefield, their engines pulsing with power and resolve. Zorak could feel the change in the air, the momentum shifting. The Zilith, once so sure of their superiority, now had to contend with something they had never truly understood: the indomitable spirit of humanity. The incoming ships weren't the massive war machines of the Zilith. They were sleek, agile, and built for speed, human-made vessels designed for precision strikes, not brute force. They didn't need overwhelming numbers or advanced technology to defeat their enemies. They relied on cunning, adaptability, and above all, the will to win. As Zorak watched the human forces rally, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. He had chosen the right side. The coalition forces, those who had once retreated to the secondary perimeter, now surged forward with renewed strength. They moved in synchronized unity, covering each other's flanks, pushing the Zilith back with methodical precision. Zorak fought alongside them, the battle becoming a dance he had learned to master. Each step, each strike was calculated, as if guided by a higher sense of purpose. The Zilith were no longer the unstoppable force they had once been. They were now the ones on the defensive. Sergeant Reyes was at the forefront, her face set with determination, her eyes scanning the battlefield with the sharp focus of a seasoned leader. She barked orders, keeping the human forces in tight formation as they advanced. Zorak, at her side, was a force of nature, his every movement swift and deadly. The Zilith were falling back, their ranks beginning to fracture under the combined assault of human ingenuity and resilience. "We're pushing them back," Reyes shouted over the din of battle. "Keep it up, people. Earth is ours to defend." Zorak's pulse surged with adrenaline. He had fought for the Zilith once, but their cause had always felt hollow, built on the subjugation of others. Now, fighting with the humans, he understood what it meant to fight for something real, something worth dying for. He wasn't just defending a planet. He was fighting for freedom, for the future of humanity itself. As the last of the Zilith forces in the ravine were wiped out, the remaining enemy ships retreated, regrouping in the distance. The battle was far from over, but it was clear the tide had turned. Zorak knew this was their moment. The Zilith had underestimated the resilience of Earth and its people. Now they would feel the full force of humanity's resolve. The coalition's new tactics, fighting with speed, coordination, and unwavering purpose, had left the Zilith reeling. Their overconfidence had been their downfall. The Zilith had never encountered an opponent like the humans before. Every time they thought they had gained the upper hand, the humans adapted, adjusted, and struck back harder. Zorak led the charge toward the remaining Zilith ships, his massive form cutting through the chaos with terrifying speed. The coalition forces followed, moving with a ferocity that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Their goal was clear: to finish what they had started and force the Zilith into a retreat they would never forget. As the Zilith fleet began to regroup in the distance, Zorak heard the distinct sound of a Zilith warship charging its plasma cannon. It was one of their flagship vessels, a formidable beast that had been at the heart of the initial attack. Zorak's instincts kicked in. He knew that if the Zilith fired that weapon, it would decimate the coalition forces in a single blast. "We've got to take it down," Zorak shouted, sprinting toward the massive ship, his eyes locked on the glowing barrel of the plasma cannon. Reyes was right behind him, her rifle blazing as she provided cover for Zorak. "On it! Let's move!" The human forces followed, a wave of determination behind them. Zorak pushed himself harder, his body moving with the lethal grace he had learned in the Zilith ranks. But now he was fighting for something greater. The human soldiers weren't just following orders. They were fighting for their homes, their families, their future. The distance between Zorak and the Zilith flagship closed quickly. The plasma cannon was charging, but it was clear that the Zilith didn't yet realize the full scope of the human assault. They had been too focused on the ground forces to notice the human ships closing in on them from above. "Reyes, take out their shields," Zorak ordered as he reached the flagship's outer hull. Without hesitation, Reyes aimed her weapon at the weak points in the Zilith ship's defenses. The plasma shots hit their mark, causing the ship's energy shields to flicker and weaken. Zorak grinned as he turned to the rest of the human forces, signaling them to press forward. The Zilith flagship was now vulnerable. "Time to finish this," Zorak muttered under his breath. With one final surge of strength, Zorak leapt onto the hull of the ship, his claws digging into the metal as he tore through the external defenses. He could hear the Zilith soldiers inside scrambling, but it was too late. Zorak had already made his way to the heart of the ship's power core. He knew exactly what to do next. Reyes and the rest of the squad followed, climbing the hull to assist. They worked together, placing charges on critical systems. Zorak made sure the explosives were positioned perfectly, setting the timer with a single, decisive motion. "Let's go!" Zorak yelled as they made their way back to the safety of their own lines. The charge detonated moments later, sending a shockwave that could be felt for miles. The Zilith flagship was torn apart in a massive explosion, a final, glorious symbol of humanity's resistance. The remaining Zilith forces faltered as their flagship was obliterated. They tried to regroup, but the humans, energized by their victory, pressed forward with unwavering determination. As the last of the Zilith ships were driven from Earth's atmosphere, Zorak stood among the humans, his chest heaving with exertion. The battlefield was littered with debris, the sounds of battle fading into the distance. Earth had been defended and humanity had emerged victorious. Sergeant Reyes walked up to Zorak, a grin spreading across her face. "You did good, Zorak." "We all did." Zorak smiled, the weight of the battle lifting from his shoulders. For the first time, he truly understood what it meant to fight for something that mattered. The Zilith had learned a hard lesson. Humanity would never surrender, never back down, and never stop fighting for their future. And as he looked out at the survivors of the battle, he knew one thing for certain: this was just the beginning. The Zilith had underestimated humanity once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stellar HFY content. Ring that bell to stay updated, and we'll see you next time.